Hello and welcome to Circle Time, the Early Years podcast with me, Glenn Denny. And I'm delighted to have on the podcast this week the amazing Kathryn Solly, who is just so enthusiastic and, just talks so much about the benefits of being outside and learning outside with children. Kathryn, welcome.
Thank you, Glenn. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you.
Thank you. So we were having a little talk, obviously, before we started recording about sort of outdoors and learning outdoors. And, what's your view on that? Why should children be outside?
I think young children, well, even older children, adults, learn best when they're in nature, when they're outdoors in the world around them. They're curious beings naturally, and they want to find out more. They want to touch, they want to find their way around things, they want to taste, smell. The taste, obviously, one has to think about carefully, but all these sensorial things are firing up their neurons in their brains and leading to language and experimentation and discovery. And the curiosity thing goes faster and faster and faster. And also, outdoors is about active exploration. It's about locomotion, it's about balance, manipulation, all those sorts of things that we need for life. So the more children are outdoors, the better. And certainly Germany, they've found that they've stopped giving kindergarten smooth paths because actually the children need bumpy paths with roots and things like that in them, because then their whole coordination and balance develops more effectively. And then when they're older, like me, they're less likely to fall over because their whole body is attuned to coping with different surfaces. So as well as all the health and well-being things. But I think it's also the excitement of being outside. And so many children have been inside far too much. COVID has added to that for a lot of children, not all children. Yeah. But it means that they have more freedom. And it's freedom with guidance, to use a Froebelian term. But it's, wise guidance generally. It's not just a run around the play area and back in. It's time for them rather than adult-led agendas, which are much more strong indoors.
Definitely. I know from sort of past experience in other settings that I've worked in, I've worked in one setting where I could see a huge difference. It was so noticeable, the difference between the way my group of children were behaving and learning and just being inside to the way they were outside. And outside, there was the excitement, there was the movement, there was the curiosity and the thought and just wanting to investigate and try and do. Whereas inside, it was almost quite passive. And, in a way, sometimes it was a bit like a caged animal where they just wanted to get out and they were just running around. But yet different when we were outside, and particularly in sort of a natural environment rather than a playground environment. I think that's the difference, isn't it? Even when we're outside.
The interactions flow, even with children with no or very little language, or children who are working in several languages, their body language will sort of draw other children towards them as well as adults, and that engagement will lead to really positive interactions. And we know that language, like physicality, is so important in their whole development.
Definitely. That was one of the marked things I had as well, in that children were more willing to come and talk to you or ask you something, or that communication and language as well was so. I think it was that they felt free to actually bring their voices up, and they could shout, because we have that thing in early years, indoor voices please, whereas outdoors, go for it. There's nothing to echo around the room, because we are so free.
Yeah, I think, in so many ways that freedom is so important. Children live in often very small, restricted homes with actually quite a lot of noise in them. computers, radios, televisions, what have you. The opposite also happens outside, in that they get peace, quiet, stillness too.
Mhm.
So again, you've got a different sort of interactional quality. And I mean, lots of research shows things like hearing adjusts by going inside and outside. Likewise, eyesight. We're sitting on a sort of myopia epidemic because children are spending too much time indoors, and they're becoming short-sighted as a result, because the eyes need to learn to adjust to changeable light levels, like the ears need to adjust to different sound levels.
That's quite fascinating, actually. I never even like it's one of those things that somebody says something to you, like, I never really considered that. Yeah, particularly inside, the light levels are all the same
Yeah.
because we have the same kind of lighting everywhere within the room. And yet outside, the sun goes behind a cloud.
Yeah.
Massive change of light in there. Even at we're recording this in winter, and that obviously has an effect on the amount of daylight we have, and even what kind of daylight we have. Like, for example, today it's been a particularly foggy day, so that's actually quite an interesting thought, really.
Yeah, and the weather also affects things like sound.
Mm-hmm.
Fog will dampen the sound down. Wind will take your words away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
All these things that I think we almost take for granted. But research shows that they are very important.
absolutely are. I mean, there's that bit as well. I think. Do you think as well that some practitioners lack that confidence to be outside? I mean, I've worked with some practitioners where they're okay when it's the rubber surfed playground and the bikes and the nice safe sort of stuff, but if you take them somewhere like into the woodland or something like that, then they start getting a bit nervous about it. Do you think there is that sort of lack of confidence, or is it understanding?
I think it varies. I think a lot of less experienced younger staff often haven't had the experiences themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They've grown up with the national curriculum, and that is inclined to have sort of structured their thinking in fairly straight lines, whereas people like me are older, and I won't say wiser, but our education was more varied, and perhaps that led to different experiences. But I think even if you live in a high rise in a city, you can go outside. It's not about being rural or what have you. It's about having that experience. And I think parents, grandparents, connections actually are the people who take children outside.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of evidence that's saying families of different ethnicities sometimes feel restricted outside. They feel that parks and places like that, National Trust or whatever it might be, are not places where they feel welcome. I think that's beginning to change, but again, we have to factor in all these things, like children with special educational needs. Inevitably their families want to protect them, but they can overprotect them and bubble wrap them
Yes.
from having those outdoor experiences too. So I think when you go back to the staff, their own experiences matter, and you have to start with where that person is at, and encourage, give them as much rich professional development opportunities to work alongside people. I mean, I don't necessarily mean courses. I mean, we live in a challenging time, and CPD is a very expensive thing.
Yeah.
But working alongside somebody who's more confident, who I would call an outdoor champion, actually will grow that person's self-confidence. And then, the leader, the head teacher, the manager coming along and saying, oh, I like the way you're doing that so-and-so with the children. Again, their confidence will be boosted, and little by little, their expertise will grow. And things like journals and stuff like that, Nursery World, Early Years Educator, professional stuff that you can find on the internet will all add to that, because there is a huge amount of really valuable stuff now. I think I'm heartened by how things have changed. They are definitely getting better, and we only have to look at Scotland and Wales to actually see how much the outdoors is valued in those countries, and Northern Ireland to a degree too. So
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I've been fortunate enough to have worked both in Scotland. I mean, for the majority of my 25-year career, majority of it was in Scotland and part of it was in England. And there is a marked difference between the emphasis on outdoors and being outdoors and encouraging that love of nature and the natural world compared to what there is in England. There is a huge difference between that, and I don't want to say it's inbuilt to the curriculum because the curriculum is open to interpretation by each setting as well. But there is that huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of factors. Things like the environment matter. I mean, if you've only got a tiny space with a wall or a fence around it, you're going to have to think very creatively.
Mhm.
But things like gardening actually can happen in a tiny space. And things like using walls and fences with, the climbing things and to weave in and to grow plants up. It's amazing actually how you can enrich an environment, and by collecting things like loose parts and using natural materials like sand, water, clay, in ways that children then lead the learning rather than the adults.
I think so as well. Yeah, that's a definite good point that, it should be, as we were talking about before, the children's natural curiosity, and that we're there to support, and to provide the resources and really just see where they go with it. But sometimes I think, particularly, yeah, again, it could be from where the child is from and their starting point is, if you give a child from in a city some sand to play with, are they going to know what it is? So it's kind of an important kind of starting point as well for adults.
Yeah, I think, as adults, we have to think about our principles, our aims, our ethos, and all those sorts of things, because it's about what we want children to learn and how we want them to learn. And, the pioneers, the Froebels, the Montessoris, the Macmillans, Susan Isaacs, who actually started the school I was head teacher in, all actually go back to these basic things.
Mm.
But whilst I think people are more aware of the pioneers, they don't always get them. Let's face it, they lived a long time ago, and in different but challenging times, it wasn't really easy for them either. But we can learn from them, and we can learn from other places around the world. But we can't pick something up from the past or from another part of the world and implant it in our way of life. It has to come from within us,
Yeah.
within our boundaries and experience. And when you're dealing with a multicultural, multi-faith, multilingual group of children, you've got to consider where they're coming from and where their families are coming from too.
I think there's that term that's kind of coming to the fore now is play diet as well, isn't it? Which is kind of where the child is starting from, what their understanding of certain things are. Like I mentioned, there some inner city children who've maybe never been to a beach or the seaside, and you set up a lovely outdoor environment with sand and the water to represent a beach. They might not necessarily understand that you can build sandcastles because that's not within their experience, therefore it's not in their play diet. So there's that kind of interesting starting point there.
Yeah, I've never heard the phrase play diet before. That's a new one on me. So,
There
but I
you go.
mean, when I worked in London, I mean, we had 40 odd languages, and children from refugee asylum backgrounds as well as, more comfortably off children. And the only inhibitor of the children going outside and using this very rich environment was generally parental,
Mm-hmm.
or that they had had some sort of traumatizing experience, maybe in a refugee camp, that had frightened them of being outside. Sometimes it was the weather. A parent would say, I don't want you getting wet today.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would sort of hover by the door. And I was guilty sometimes of saying, look, if we put this on, then you can go out and you can do lots of learning and lots of playing and benefit from the outside, and then we can change you back into your other things before you go home. Now that's slightly anarchic, but in the end, it's what am I here for? I'm here for the child firstly.
Yes.
And whilst I'm in danger of giving mixed messages, I want that child to be happy and learn, and they wouldn't be standing there looking like they want to go out if they didn't want to go out, but something's holding them back. So again, you have to sort of consider these things and
There's
then
that bit,
encourage the parents.
yeah, there's that bit though that I mean, our role is to provide enriching experiences for the children's learning and development and growth. And that's really what you were doing there, was you could see that the child had open curiosity and you wanted to provide something that the child was interested in. And there is that bit that, I've seen it in my career as well, where parents go, well, they've got a bit of a sniffle, so I don't want them going outside.
Yes.
You're like, going outside's not, just wrap up warm, they'll be fine. And you have to have that. I think sometimes as well, we have to have that dialogue. And I think that's where you were going as well, that yes, you gave the child that experience, but then you opened up the dialogue for the parent to say, well, look, this is what they're interested in. And I think that's important, is the open dialogue with parents and try and encourage and explain to them why it's beneficial.
Yeah, and the child generally leads them. And you can support the child with some photos, bits of video clips, things like that in their records. And the parent will think, oh, right, I can see why they're doing that and how that relates to the sort of formal curriculum, and how their language has come on because they're really interested in X, Y, or Z, or, the fact that they can climb and do this, that, and the other as a result of. So it's a sort of tapestry. I always think, the outside is a tapestry, but you're weaving things in, you're embroidering other things, you're attaching buttons and feathers and what have you. And no outdoor area, no outdoor experience, no piece of play or learning outdoors will be the same for any child, even in the same environment. It's the uniqueness that allows us to enable children and their families to see the potential, the huge potential of being outside.
It was interesting that a point you made there as well, in that, obviously we still do observations. We put photos on the tablet for our parents to see, because it's important for the parents to know what their children are doing. But what we've tried to do is, and it's kind of going back to something you said there, is we're not just saying, oh, so-and-so was outside running today, but we're saying so-and-so was outside running today. And by doing that, they were learning to control their stop-start. They were looking at their distance. We tried to put the learning and expand it so the parents go, all right, so it wasn't just running. This is actually what they're getting from it. Sometimes some parents feel that we should be sitting them down, and particularly in the preschool, the 3 to 5s, they should be sitting down and being formally taught.
Yeah, I agree. And in a sense, we have to sort of guide, support, encourage. And it's a bit sort of like leaving the breadcrumbs, Hansel and Gretel like, for people to follow. And they will follow eventually. I can't think of actually any parent in my 17 years as a head and however many years before that, where, parents didn't get it, basically. And that was families of all sorts and backgrounds and what have you. So I think time matters and pace. You have to sort of judge those things again, because some children, won't look back. Others will need more time and a bit more nurturing, and likewise their families. And likewise staff too.
Yes.
So, and then the other thing I was thinking about staff is about clothing. And I think that's particularly important now, because salaries aren't what they should be. And, your lowest paid member of staff actually isn't going to want to get their best coat and boots mucky outside. So if humanly possible, providing gear, good quality gear that is owned by the setting, by the school, and goes back to them, but is there for people to use, really will enable people to feel much more happy outside than they would be without it. And likewise, the children. There will be some children who haven't got Wellington boots, who haven't got thick socks, that we have to help them a bit in order that they get to enjoy outside.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, it is a little chilly at the moment. There was something I was going to go back to something that we talked about way back at the start, like something we haven't mentioned for a while, and we don't like to mention it, but the pandemic also had an effect on children's experiences outdoors, because I think a lot of parents just want, when they were at home, just wanted to keep them safe. So, if they didn't have that space in the garden as well. And, I don't know if you saw it as well, but a lot of settings were putting out information with ideas and activities and things like that. But it did have that detrimental effect.
Yes, I think a lot of children and young people really lost out. I mean, I'm lucky we have a huge park next to us. And so we used to go and do our daily walk round, wearing masks and what have you. But every child I saw, they're looking at adults with this rectangular thing over their nose and mouths. And so I started saying, hello, how are you? What have you been doing? And sort of trying to engage with them, because those are the sorts of things that would have happened normally. Older people would have talked to families. Oh, you've got a lovely new baby. That sort of went it, and we were sort of, ooh, don't get too close and what have you. I remember somebody telling me not to pat their dog. And you just think, well, if you don't want me to pat your dog, then maybe you need to put it on a lead. So, and the children were on leads, but not the dogs.
Yes.
Metaphorical one.
It did kind of turn everything upside down as well. And there is that bit where I think we stopped being close and we stopped playing really and being outside and mixing. And well, obviously we had to stop mixing, but then it took a long time for everyone to gain that confidence. And do you think we're actually back where we were?
No, but I mean, if you think of a parent in a high rise with a lift, would you have wanted to get in a lift with your precious family, go down in that lift, go out for a walk, and then come back again? I mean, I can see it through those sort of eyes, and those children would have lost huge physical input. Other children would have lost out on communication, language, interactions. And whilst I think a lot of parents did an awful lot at home, it wasn't the same. It wasn't the normal. It wasn't the sort of things that natural child development supports. I mean, I always like to refer to the letters HOMES, HOMES. The H is for hands-on. So would they have had anything messy to play with?
No.
Open-ended is the O. Again, parents, are often very good at these things, but sometimes they restrict things because, homes are homes and what have you, and nobody wants their carpet covered in paint or sand or what have you, unless they're very brave. And then the M is meaningful. And again, if that's child-led, that can be a very different agenda to a parent. And then the E is engaging, which is a bit like the meaningful, because you can hook a child in, but whether they'll stick with it depends on them very much. And then the S is sensorial. And again, that's an area which I think a lot of children really missed out on.
Yeah, I mean, talking from my own experience in the setting I was at the time, we took away a lot of things, like we took away Play-Doh and water play and sand play. And the children really, really missed it. In fact, I think I missed it as well. But there was that bit where even within the setting, we were in bubbles. So we weren't able to mix. So our younger children couldn't mix with the older children because there was that shared experience that, the older ones helping the younger ones. And a lot of that went as well. So that shared experience had been curtailed.
Yeah, and I think that social emotional piece is the bit we really haven't quantified. We can do observations much more easily on language and physicality, but the social emotional stuff is often deep in hearts and minds, and therefore it may be a time before we actually find out what the true impact of the isolation has been.
I think so. I mean, I know there's the inquiry at the moment, but whether or not it takes into account the kind of the loss of, the physicality and the outdoors for children, I mean, we might never know the answer to that one.
No, I think, was it Dewey who said that we only think when we're confronted by a problem? And I think we haven't done enough thinking about it. But putting children into school earlier and earlier is not going to help the situation. We might be far better moving to a kindergarten stage like Scotland's trying to do, because that's actually developmentally much more feasible for young children.
Well, it's interesting as well. Like, so in Scotland, they've got curriculum for excellence. And I'm old enough to remember that coming in as well. I'm old enough to remember when there wasn't a curriculum for early years. Oh, those lovely days.
I remember those days.
Oh, yes. But when curriculum for excellence came in, it was interesting that it took them from age 3 for curriculum for excellence, but also the early level of curriculum for excellence takes in primary 1, so 5-year-olds as well. And it's interesting that it developed that way. And it was kind of that emphasis as well, but it was almost like the outdoors was almost an afterthought, because I know Juliet Robertson as well was involved in part of developing the outdoor curriculum part or element for curriculum for excellence. But it's interesting that Scotland are thinking about that and moving towards the kindergarten stage, because I think that's important that children have that experience of play and learning much longer than they do at the moment.
Yeah, I think, in a sense, we need to calm down, slow down, and pace ourselves as well as the children. It's not about opening all the doors and windows and skylights and things for children. They need to open these things for themselves and go outside. Sometimes it feels like, we're almost pushing them to do the next thing on the curriculum list and what have you, rather than it being child-led and unique. The unique child is still, I think, a crucial thing that's being missed. And in England, the characteristics of effective learning actually underpin everything. If you look at those, they would actually be fine if you just left those there and took everything else away, in my professional opinion.
No, I'd absolutely 100% agree with you. In fact, if there was more than 100%, I'd agree that. But it was interesting. I was looking at sort of, with EYFS, we're looking at a curriculum for our nursery, and that's the one thing I put down. I scrapped the whole statements and everything else, and I just kept the characteristics of effective learning, because it is completely the foundation of how we learn as humans, rather than just children. Obviously, the characteristics go on as we get older, but it's interesting that they're there, but they're not really focused on.
Yeah, and yet when you look at the things like the OECD and what they want young people to have in terms of skills, knowledge, and understanding in the future, they actually match the characteristics of effective learning very well. It's things like collaborative problem solving and communication and connection and things like that. And you just think, why don't we actually sort of join the whole thing together rather than sort of take things apart and make it, full of holes? But then what do I know?
Well, quite a bit. There's that bit. Yeah, it is interesting. It's like, we almost borrow bits from here and borrow bits from there, but why don't we just focus on the absolute basics? I think that's so important. If we don't get the basics right, we're not going to get anything else right.
Yeah, I think that's why, in a sense, particularly when I retired, outdoors became my focus. It had been throughout my whole career, because I've had a fairly unorthodox career, but I felt that outdoors was the thing I was going to make the most difference and impact with, because it often isn't well led. It's just managed, or it's an afterthought. Oh, playtime, the children go out and run around. The adults either escape to a staff room or stand around with mugs with lids on, looking very uncomfortable. And, that needs to change, and I felt that from my heart, I had to be courageous and take that on. But things are moving on, but not fast enough, perhaps, for the children.
It's interesting as well, like there is more of an emphasis in Scotland. I'm looking more at that because obviously I'm going back up to Scotland. And there is more of an emphasis now on learning outdoors in Scotland than there is. And it's heartening to think that, the eyes are finally starting to open to why this is so important, why this is crucial for children's development.
Yeah, well, there are many countries, New Zealand, Germany, Scandinavia,
Mm.
and various other places around the world where, I've witnessed outdoor play, outdoor learning being high quality and being as valued as indoors,
Mhm.
not only for babies and young children, but for older children too. Why we have this fixation on being sat at desks, it's a very sort of Victorian England thing. It's about control, I'm sure.
Mm.
Um, a political with a small p control of lots, of numbers. It's an easier way to look after a lot of children, sat behind a table. They're less likely to get up to mischief that way.
Well, you say that. Uh, no, it was interesting. You actually came out with Victorian, and to be honest, that was going on in my head. Going, we do like have a very Victorian style education system. No matter what they do to it, no matter what fluffy names they bring out or what ridiculous schemes they come up with, it's still very heavily influenced by the Victorian style of teaching and education. And it does need a massive shift to change everything.
I mean, things like pen licenses. What is that all about? You can write very ably with a piece of chalk. You
Mhm.
can use a paintbrush even. You don't need a pen to be able to write with. I mean, it's a sort of reward for being so controlled that you've exhibited certain things. But actually, if you'd been outside, you might have got that pen license a damn sight quicker than you would have done being stuck inside doing handwriting. I put my hands up. I did handwriting practice when I taught infants, but we got that out of the way very quickly and then got on with the real stuff. So, including looking after 2 crocodiles, but that's another story.
Wow. If we weren't running out of time, I would go part crocodile. I think that might be a conversation we're going to have again.
I did say I'd had an unorthodox career.
Absolutely have. I feel we could talk an awful lot longer, but unfortunately, time has crept up on us. And I want to say, Kathryn, thank you so much for talking to us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And my pleasure too. So I shall look forward to another chat, perhaps. So
Definitely. We'll pop one in the diary.
thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you so much. And don't forget, you can tune into more of our podcasts by visiting our website, circletimepodcast.co.uk.